because we're essentially getting sugar in a heightened, quick form. That's what makes something addictive. And if we were just eating natural food, it would be too slow it would be metabolically broken down so slowly it wouldn't be addictive.
Right. Now, one of my favorite parts of your book is when you talk about the different levels and units of dopamine and how different drugs and different activities have different rewards. What I found absolutely fascinating is how you talked about something natural, like a couple having sex. This releases 200 units of dopamine.
Yeah.
And somewhere between the range of 100 to 300 units of dopamine, these kinds of safe, fun, regular activities that people do, going for a hike in nature or whatever, playing violin or whatever it is that gets you into a great state. You know, if you go above those levels, like say with cocaine, you mentioned in the book at 400 units of dopamine, that this is much more likely to become an addictive thing for you. So
it's overpowering our natural rewards, which with the expectation, like you said, of 0 to 200 or maybe 250. And we can say no to that if we really want to. But when it's a 300, 400 or more, it's really hard to say no to that.
Right. And we see so much of that in our modern environments today. You know, you talk about sugar and how its original form is in a sugar cane. You know, no one is running around all day trying to, you know, chew on sugar cane. But once you refine it, process it, you give it this incredibly rapid delivery into the brain and body, you know. So why is it at these really high levels, you know, does it become habit forming?
Well, I like that word that you use, rapid delivery. I have to remember that because that's exactly what happens. The food industry gives a rapid delivery.
What is it about the level of going sort of over 300 units that makes it a habit forming?
Well, okay, so see what happens is we have a nature, our natural system, which is attuned to natural food, is you know, in sync, and it's perfectly created in such a way that I might really like something, but my ability to say no if I have to say no because I'm going to be working the next day or whatever, I can say no. It's a system that's just perfectly calibrated. And when you go outside of that calibration, so I like to call that natural, and then outside of that calibration is the supernatural, or the ordinary versus the extraordinary. And when you move into that realm, first of all, you get that euphoric feeling that is great. At least it's great initially, but the brain doesn't like that. It doesn't like that being constantly in the extraordinary. So almost immediately, it starts to adapt to the new by upregulating receptors, and that doesn't happen immediately. But it's well, I mean, it is actually happening immediately, but gradually, slowly. And
do you mean downregulating?
Yes, downregulating. It depends. It's upregulating and then downregulating. What's happening is the receptors are trying to match the extra load. So there's more receptors to match the load. Then you become essentially what we call tolerant to the abundant mode. But then with the receptors matching this abundance, it's now the new normal. And that's essentially the habit that's now formed, because if I don't have that amount, then I'm going to be in deficit. My receptors are needing to be filled, and they can't be because I'm not taking the amount that now is like 3 Mars bars a day or whatever it is, a couple of drinks a day. And now I'm in pain, which will also recalibrate back, but it takes a little bit of time. And we call that recalibration back withdrawal, post-acute withdrawal. And that takes also about 3 or 4 weeks.
I found that to be one of the most fascinating parts of your book as well, was talking about how there was this downregulation that a person then needs to have, that even just that whatever amount of it is, same amount or more, just to then feel normal.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And so the motivation then becomes no longer, I'm using this substance to feel good. It like, to feel really good. It's more like I'm using this substance so that I don't feel bad. In other words, that I can just feel normal now. And we call the first one positive reinforcement and the second one negative reinforcement. And in terms of brain biology, the first one, if you're interested in talking about that, the first one is going to the nucleus accumbens, which is, our pleasure area. That gets triggered. It's very powerful, motivating. It's the thing that motivates us to do. But then the second tier, when I'm doing something just to feel normal, I don't want to feel bad, I'm also now kicking in the amygdala, the stress response. I'm trying to manage stress. I'm trying to manage my depression. Like, we've now got two huge motivators in gear to keep me in my addiction, basically. I mean, as far as the brain goes, it makes complete sense to be behaving this way. It may not look like that out externally, but if you look at the brain, what it's trying to do, it's trying to take care of itself. And
Right.
it's just that the addiction has made the circumstances such that it makes sense to use, basically. And that's thanks to the food industry and the cigarette industry and the dealers the alcohol industry, whoever they are.
Yeah, I was such a poignant part. I read Wheat Belly many, many years ago, and
Yeah,
I had kind of forgotten about this part, but you mentioned it again in your book where you said, beer is basically liquid bread,
bread.
and
Yeah,
bread solid beer, and rum is liquid sugar, and sugar is solid rum, and the only difference is this fermentation and distillation process, but it creates the same very powerful combination of activating all three receptors, the dopamine receptor, serotonin, and also endorphins, right? So I love how you talk about in the book about how we have this extremely sophisticated reward system to motivate us to do things, and the reward has to be intrinsically rewarding enough to get you to like leave your cave and go hunt food. It has to be reward in itself. And yet, today we have completely surrounded ourselves with these convenience foods and things that hijack that reward system, and you almost become powerless to it. But one thing that I know you talked about a lot of the research that's been coming out more in the last decade. And one particular study showed that they compared obese people to people who were of normal or regular average weight. And the obese people had less receptors, I think it was less dopamine receptors than the healthy individuals. And I thought that was such a fascinating study, and I was wondering if they were saying that, I think in the book you were connecting it to a genetic predisposition, but I'm not sure if that also, those lower, D2 receptor, was that downregulation from use as well?
I'm actually very impressed by how well you've read the book, because that's exactly what I was saying. You could almost say that addiction is a kind of dopamine 2 receptor deficiency or impairment or something like that. The concept of, so what is it about the dopamine? I mean, I say dopamine 2 receptors, but there's actually, I think, 5 or 6 or maybe more, but that's the area that has the most research has been on. And it's really just association research at this point. People are saying, oh, well, look at this. We've got alcohol. Here we've got an obese person or an alcoholic. And if we look in their family history, we see that there's a similar pattern of either alcoholism or obesity in the family. And then we can see that there's something about the dopamine 2 receptors. But what the connection is and what came first, that's still up for grabs. That's a great area of research.